Good evening. No. Happy Monday, Miss Deborah. Excuse me for a second, guys, while I get... No. Here we go. At some point, I will streamline this at some point. There we go. All right. There we go. All right. Oh, I had a nice weekend. It was a short weekend, but it was nice. So, oh my goodness. What's up, Ishmael? Oh Lord, I am all discombobulated right now, guys. So, thank you for the hat. Thank you. So I just, like literally 15 minutes ago, I just woke up from a nap. But it was one of those naps where I forgot like what time of the day it was. Like my phone said 7:45, and because of how the light looked outside, I couldn't for just a second, I couldn't decide if it meant 7:45 a.m. or p.m. And so I threw myself out of bed, ran out into the dining room, and I was like, I looked at my husband and I was like, oh my God, are you kidding me? Because I was checking the clock on the stove and the microwave. I'm like, okay, maybe my phone is wrong. Maybe it's, and I was like, oh my God, I'm gonna be late for work. and then at 7:45, like properly, my alarm went off. Because I woke up literally like 2 minutes before my alarm was supposed to go off, and it was like, get up for book reading, and I was like, oh my God, it's 7:45 p.m. It's 7:45 p.m. So I hi babies. Mimi says hello. Oh, but that was my excitement for the evening. I thought I had slept in and was getting ready to be late for work. So, yeah, fun times and excitement to be had by all. All right, well, for anyone who's new, welcome. We are doing a book reading this evening, if you can't already tell. And we are halfway done with this particular book. This is the first in a series of the Kishara by Amelia Atwater Rhodes. So if you have missed the previous readings, I have them on my YouTube channel. So if you just go to my bio here on TikTok, you'll see the little like camera icon. Just click that and then you'll see the little YouTube icon. It's got Mimi next to it, so just click on that and it'll be in my book readings playlist. So that way if you missed one reading, two readings, all the readings, half a reading, or you just want to hear me read again, you can find all of my book readings that are recorded already there in sequential order, so you don't have to figure out, the order. It's already there. Hi, Luca. So yeah. Man, I'm still bouncing back from that the adrenaline dump that's like flowing through me right now. Oh my God. I hate that. I hate waking up thinking that I'm going to be late for something or that I've missed something. Ugh, good Lord. Anyway, so we're going to get started. It's about 8:05. We're going to get started. For anyone who has the book, we are currently on page 125. We are at chapter 11. So we're going to go for about an hour, so I don't know. That'll get us probably through the next 2, 3 chapters, perhaps. So here we go. Oh, real quick. Thumbs. Good night, babies. Sleep tight. Mimi loves you. Mwah. So if you guys can hear me all right, just as a quick test, just give me some hearts, give me some thumbs up. Let me know if you can hear me. Just before I get started reading, just so I know. Thumbs up. Okay, cool. Good. Fabulous. Good. Okay, all right, here we go. I was going to faint. I had never fainted in my life. It was not a common avian dilemma. But at the moment, it was less terrifying than the thought of walking in front of a large group of serpient when the only people present who might consider protecting me were Zane Cobriana and his personal guards. Guards I trusted to defend me in a crowd as much as I would trust them to knife me at the earliest opportunity. Finally, I heard my cue and stepped from the antechamber onto the dais at the north side of the sinkhole. Instantly, I heard reaction from the crowd. Shouts and questions, which were muted to numb shock when I moved to Zane's side. Zane's words were white noise in my ears as I stood beside him. I caught my hands trembling. I remembered Charisse's assurance that touching was common and even expected in serpient society, and I wrapped an arm around his waist in an attempt to halt my own shaking. Zane seemed startled for a moment, then continued to speak, finishing with, "Allow me to introduce my Naga, Danica Chardet." The palace guards were visible in the crowd, though they were not in uniform for the ceremony. I had been introduced to the majority of them by Irene that afternoon, and assured multiple times that at least one of them would always be at my side. They had been prepared, and even though most of them had expressed doubts earlier, they did not allow that hesitation to show now as they knelt. Like ripples in a pond, each guard who knelt was surrounded by other serpents who followed their lead. Within a few moments of the first guard's movement, all but 4 figures had recovered from their shock and knelt. "Kendrick?" Zane's voice carried over the hall, an ounce of threat mixed with light inquiry. I don't know what—" Kendrick looked around himself and seemed to notice that he was one of very few who were making a spectacle of refusing Zane's chosen Naga. As he sputtered, one of the remaining 4 went down on his knee. "She's a hawk." Zane appeared amused. "Really? But, sir, she's Danica Chardet," the poor man protested. "I just said that," Zane responded, refusing to be ruffled. Zane, in contrast to his easily projected voice, mine was soft, intending only for Zane's ears. He turned to face me, ignoring for the moment the serpient he had been in the process of turning into a fool. "You can't expect everyone to just accept this." "Of course not," he responded softly, lowering his head so his lips were just a short distance above mine. He had wrapped his arms around my waist, and it suddenly occurred to me what our pair must look like to the court. But I can expect everyone to pretend to. Another of the 4 knelt while he was speaking. Kendrick and the woman who was still standing exchanged a glance around the room. Zane brushed a kiss across my lips, so briefly that I had no time to respond, and then he straightened to speak to the court again. "Kendrick, there's no need for jealousy. You're welcome to go out and find your own beautiful hawk," Zane said lightly. "Zane, this is crazy!" This came from the woman, upon whom Zane turned his gaze with a bit of a smile. "Pamela, no doubt you are right. I must be stark raving mad." There was an amused murmuring in the crowd as Zane continued. "I must have lost my mind to want someone as beautiful and charming as this for my partner. To think Danica Chardet could possibly have walked into the sinkhole, despite protests from her guards and family, despite the fact that they might very well throw her out of the keep for daring to answer my dearest prayer." At that he went down on one knee before me, one of my hands clasped in his. "For her to abandon all propriety and become my Naga." By the end of the speech, Pamela was actually grinning. I could feel a similar expression on my own face at the dramatic humor with which Zane had spoken. The only thing that spoiled the moment was the glimpse I caught of white blonde hair as Adelina walked stiffly out the back of the sinkhole. My attention was drawn to Alib, who looked after his sister for a moment, shook his head, and returned his attention to the crowd. Zane, Kendrick broke off as Zane tugged on my hand, bringing me down to kneel with him on the dais. May I? Zane's voice was soft as he reached forward and brushed a thumb across my lips. I nodded. In one graceful movement, Zane wrapped an arm around my waist and pulled me toward him, then gently pressed his lips to mine. For a few heartbeats, I managed to ignore the fact that there were probably 300 to 500 pairs of eyes on us. I pulled back first, and Zane let go with obvious reluctance. He kept an arm around my waist as we stood side by side, and with a sweep of his free hand he introduced simply, Naga Danica Charday, your people. 2 of the guard moved toward to flank us as we stepped down from the dais. Musicians took our place, and we were instantly surrounded by Zane's people. My people. I hugged closer to Zane, feeling the flutter of my heart beating so fast it was a constant hum in my ears. Serpents moved differently than I was used to, and put less space between themselves and others. The colors that surrounded me were equally foreign. Used to the warm brown or gold eyes of the avian court, here I was faced by hot garnet, sapphire, and emerald gazes, jeweled tones as varied and exotic as the sensual outfits and the unreserved voices and expressions the serpent wore. I was like a child raised without color who had suddenly been thrown into a giant painter's palette. It was impossible not to notice the warmth with which the serpent greeted their diente, or the chill with which many of them regarded me. Women found every excuse they could to reach out and put a hand on Zane's shoulder or arm. Occasionally, a man would attempt to be equally familiar with me. At that point, Zane would meet the serpent's gaze with a polite smile and a spark of ice in his eye, and coolly remind the man that I had been raised an avian lady and was not used to casual touch from strangers. In general, Zane handled the crowd like a magician, shifting from whimsy to melodrama to soft threat and back to whimsy as effortlessly as water flowing down a slope. It was eerie to watch the changes come over his face and body as he moved from one emotion to the next. A few hours later, the throng started to thin out, and a midnight feast was served for those who remained, about half of the people who had attended the ceremony. "Zane, where is Adelina?" one female serpent asked as we settled onto our places around the table. "It's rare to see you without her." Zane's light expression clouded for an instant, but he recovered quickly. "The rest of the guard is quite competent. She wasn't feeling well, and since I wasn't expecting trouble tonight, I suggested she take the night off and let Alib take over for a few hours." After having watched the play of emotion on his face all night, I knew he was lying. But the serpent nodded, not challenging Zane's words. "Is Alib going to lead Danica's guard?" another man asked. Zane appeared surprised. "Adelina and Alib will continue to lead the palace guard together," he answered. "Danica will, of course, be guarded by the royal flight." The serpent choked on the wine he had been drinking, coughing and finally sputtering. "What?" Others at the table seemed equally shocked. "You can't allow them into the palace," one woman shouted. Zane met the woman's eye squarely, not threatening yet, but bluntly honest, as he asserted, "I certainly can, and I certainly will. Danica is my Naga, and you would do well to remember that she is yours as well. I expect no one will attempt to challenge the presence of their queen's guards." "With all respect, Zane," the man responded, "I can't see myself tolerating a flock of birds in—" This time, when Zane rounded his gaze on the speaker, his expression was strong enough that the man bit back the end of his comment. Quietly, Zane pointed out, "If you cannot tolerate it, then you are within your rights to attempt to deal with what you find to be a distasteful infestation." I felt my cheeks color and was about to protest when Zane continued, his voice as cold as steel. "In that case, I would be well within my rights to charge you with treason, and both my guard and my Nagas will doubtless support the full punishment for that crime." The man's face had gone white. "I didn't mean to imply that— Of course I wouldn't." He looked around as if for backup, but found none. At last he gathered himself and finished, "If you believe they can be trusted in the palace, then it is not my place to contradict." "Correct," Zane answered. "Now, shall we eat?" The meal was good. The dishes had been carefully arranged so I was able to avoid meat without the other guests feeling deprived. Fresh bread, fruits, cheeses, and elaborate vegetarian dishes were in abundance. Venison, rabbit, pork, and beef made up the meat dishes. Apparently Zane had decided poultry would be inappropriate. It was nearly sunrise when Zane led me back to a room in which I would be able to stay. We had mutually decided that going home now would be both tactless, it would appear too impersonal to leave so shortly after the ceremony, and dangerous in my present condition. I was so exhausted, drained both physically and emotionally, that I had to lean against Zane to keep from weaving in the halls as we walked. I had left the keep early, and now it was nearly sunrise again. Laid out on the bed was a simple linen shift to sleep in, and I was relieved that someone had realized I would not be comfortable with the usual serpent practice of sleeping in only one's skin. "This room is part of my private suite," Zane explained, "and thus it is one of the most protected areas in the palace. That should keep any disgruntled vipers from breaking in during the night. My room is through that door. The bathing room there, and upon any future visits you may store clothing or other possessions in the trunks behind you. I took the liberty of having a few simple outfits made up, since it seemed likely an event like tonight's would occur, and you would need something to wear." He paused as if there was more he wanted to say. When it became evident that he was not going to speak whatever else was on his mind, I allowed my curiosity to push me into asking, "How in the world did you get my measurements to have clothing made?" Zane flashed a disturbing smile. "From Eleanor, of course." Eleanor. Eleanor Licia? My voice was breathy with shock. "Is that so surprising?" Considering how easily she agreed to help me that night, it should not have startled me to learn that the seamstress had been working with Zane. I remembered her greeting me in the market and remarking on how I comforted Gregory, and the unease I had felt when Zane revealed knowledge of those hours. When we were children, she had been so prone to mad schemes and so full of impossible dreams that it had shocked everyone when she had tamely decided to be a seamstress. Another piece of information clicked suddenly into place. "You helped design this?" I asked, gesturing to the dress I was still wearing, which had been so perfect that I had never paused to question it. I suggested that you should be provided with something appropriate for tonight. "Yes," Zane acknowledged, though, to give the credit where it is deserved, Eleanor outdid herself. The look in his eyes as they lingered on my form said more than his words, and was enough for me to want to change the subject. Zane seemed to notice my discomfort, for he cleared his throat and said more practically, "Eleanor did mention that the dress is difficult for one person to manage. Do you need help with it?" Having Zane's assistance was quite different than having a maid or Eleanor help. However, as I saw no other choice but to make a fool of myself trying to do it alone, I answered, "If you could undo the tie at the back of my neck, I can get the rest." I turned around and tried not to jump at the feel of his cool fingers on the back of my neck. I lifted my hair away and felt him hesitate at the sight of my golden feathers before loosening the tie. Awkwardly, I managed to pull the night shift over myself before dropping the burgundy dress, very conscious of Zane's presence. As I carefully folded Eleanor's masterpiece to store it safely in the trunk, I heard Zane sigh. "Danica," he broke off as I turned to face him and took a slow breath. "May I join you tonight?" My nervous expression made him continue quickly. "I'm not asking for anything beyond your company in sleep. Just let me rest the sound of your heartbeat beside mine." The request was spoken with something like wistful innocence, and I did not have the energy to be cruel enough to refuse. After Charisse's statements earlier and my observations in the sinkhole, it was not surprising that the new king of the Serpient would think it natural to sleep beside his Naga, even in a scenario as strange as ours. The Serpient bed was designed with luxury in mind, piled high with blankets of the softest, thickest wool. As I lay on my stomach, the blankets and the mattress sank beneath my weight until I was enveloped in a plush nest so comfortable that I felt sleep pulling at me instantly. Zane stretched out on his side, still wearing slacks but having discarded his formal shirt. I was suddenly very aware of him across the back of my waist, of his arm wow. I was suddenly very aware of his arm across the back of my waist. He must have felt me tense because while I bit back a protest, he was already moving to put more distance between us. A sense of awkwardness hung between us for a moment, but exhaustion was a stern master, and it was not long before I was relegated to dreams. Chapter 12. In my dreams, Vasily voiced his approval of my choice, echoing Charisse's words about altruism and adding to them words about courage. I took heart from his assurances, even though I knew they were only in my imagination. When Ray appeared, furious, I listened to him rage over my decision and waited anxiously for the scene to change. I dreamed last that I was at my own funeral. The avian court was in mourning, and as much as I tried, I could not get their attention. When I opened my eyes, it took me a few moments to realize that I was awake. During my restless dreams, I must have moved, and now I found myself lying on my back. This change in position was not unusual for me. What was unusual was Zane resting against me, his body molded to the shape of mine. One arm was under my head, providing a soft, living pillow. The other was across my waist. The position was so startlingly unexpected that I hardly knew how to react. I started to pull away and then stopped as Zane turned closer to me in his sleep. Again I shifted, and again he compensated, nuzzling against my hair, breathing in a gentle sigh. His arm tightened around my waist, hugging me close. Asleep, Zane was not thinking about who he was lying next to, but I did not have the courage to wait and see what would happen when he woke. Trying not to disturb him, I slipped out of his arms, placing bare feet on the floor and shivering at the sudden chill. I glanced back to see his eyes open, watching me. "Morning," he said, voice soft. He stood and stretched, and I suddenly found myself a little too aware not just of his hypnotic garnet eyes, but of the broad shoulders and very bare chest that accompanied them. I felt heat creep up my face and turned away, making a great pretense of searching through the trunk for a new outfit when there weren't really enough choices to make it difficult. Zane knelt beside me. He touched my cheek gently, and for the first time his skin felt as warm as mine, as warm as his voice when he said, "Should I be flattered by that charming blush?" "Compose yourself, Danica." I took a deep breath, recovering the fringes of my control and poise until I could look back at him placidly. Before I could speak, Zane tensed, withdrawing his hand. "Please don't," he said. "Don't what?" He stood up, putting distance between us as if I had suddenly sprouted claws. "I slept all night beside you, Danica. Please don't hide from me now." "I don't know what you're talking about." He sighed, shaking his head. "You breathe and move and speak, but whereas I would know a serpent was behind me even if he stood as still as a statue, when I stand in front of you now, it is as like I'm looking at a picture, something flat. Sound and sight say you were there, but there is another sense that feels nothing, a sense that is completely blind." He paused as if searching for words to explain. Tentatively, I offered, "You can sense emotion, and sense a void when I hide that emotion," I thought to myself. He hesitated, as if turning the words over in his mind. "Serpient legend, Danica, says that your kind have no souls." I was about to argue, but he continued swiftly. "I believed it until I spoke to you in the keep. You weren't guarded then. You lost your temper with me, actually. I thought I was asleep, but I did not say that aloud as he went on. And for the first time, I wasn't looking at a shell. I was looking at a real person. I was looking, I think, at the compassionate woman who comforted a dying man and who would soon become a beloved queen. Your reserve is like armor. It may be your strongest weapon against my people. Surrounded by such ghosts, a Serpient soldier is as off balance as any sparrow looking into Cobriana eyes. But we aren't at war anymore," he finished softly. My heart gave a heavy thump as he stepped back toward me, as hesitantly as I had ever moved toward him. He lifted his gaze, and I forced myself to look into his garnet eyes, which right now were rife with unease and a plea for trust. Trust. I didn't know if I had the courage for that. He stepped closer then, and kissed me, chastely and gently. A heavy knock, followed almost immediately by someone pushing open the door, caused both of us to jump. Adelina recoiled at the sight of us, and with blatant disgust in her tone, she said, "I'm sorry for the intrusion, but there is a bird demanding to see your Naga." She nodded in my direction, and when she met my gaze, her pale green eyes made me shudder. "Since I can't put a hand on him to detain him, it seems best to get her quickly to avoid a nasty scene." "Andreos?" I asked, trying to recover my composure, and feeling torn because I knew that I was doing exactly what Zane had asked me not to. He pulled away from me, not looking my way as Adelina spoke. She nodded. "He says he is the head of your guard," she answered. "I suggest you hurry before he comes looking for you." There was no chance to speak with Zane about what had just happened. I hurried into clean clothing while Zane dressed in the next room, and Adelina waited in the hall. I tied back the chaos my hair had become, and within a minute I was presentable enough to speak to Ray. Adelina escorted me to the reception hall, where Ray was pacing anxiously. I saw tension go out of his body in a rush when he saw me walking toward him uninjured. "Danica, thank the sky," he greeted me. "Eleanor gave me your letter. What are you doing here? This—" He broke off abruptly, as if just realizing we had an audience. To Zane, he said, "I would like to speak to my Tuuli Thea alone, if I may." His voice was dangerous, and Zane heeded the audible warning. "Adelina." He nodded toward the door, and his guard turned stiffly and exited. "Danica, I will be across the hall when you are finished." Once the room was cleared of everyone but Ray and me, he began again to speak. "What are you doing here, Danica? Trying to get yourself killed?" "Trying to end this war," I replied instantly. "And don't you see that it's working? Adelina didn't let you in because she took a fancy to you. Do you think the leader of the royal flight could possibly have made it this deep into the Serpent Palace if Zane wasn't trying so hard to make peace?" "Danica," I interrupted him, knowing that I would need to convince him quickly or have him argue with me forever. I knew the risks, and I was and still am willing to take them, I assured him. "The Serpent are sincere. I stood in front of their entire court, Ray, and no one tried to harm me." There was wonder in my voice. For the first time, I walked among them safely. I spoke with them without bearing threats. They are willing to follow Zane into peace. Ray sighed. "But what of you, Danica?" He shook his head in frustration. "I know you will do what you must for your people, but what about you?" He paused to take a deep breath and then continued intently. "The danger is not only from soldiers. You were raised a lady, and you were raised avian. Zane Cobriana, he will not understand that. He will expect more from you than you are prepared to give, more than any avian Alistair would ask so quickly." He caught my hand, nearly pleading. "Danica, there are reasons our two kinds do not get along. We are not meant to. The Serpent are quick to anger and quick to show it. Even among friends there is violence. Ray, I need your support," I pleaded, letting my own self-control slip to match the emotion in his voice. "I know the Serpent are not the same as our people. I am not foolish enough not to be frightened, but I am willing to risk my life if that will keep me from holding another child while he dies." Ray nodded reluctantly, his brown eyes still warm with worry. I know," he said finally. "I wish I could convince you, but I know. You would not be the woman I love if you were not prepared to suffer for your people. But, Danica—" He broke off, shaking his head, and instead asked, "You intend to announce Zane as your Alistair tomorrow, I assume?" I nodded, grateful for his acquiescence. "I would recommend bringing Zane into the keep with as few people's knowledge as possible. I will make sure the royal flight won't cause trouble, and the court is too well-mannered to cause a scene in front of its Tuuli Thea. Aside from my soldiers, the most zealous of your people will be guarding the keep, not watching the ceremony." He returned to pacing. "They won't like it, obviously. They won't trust Zane, no matter how mellow his troops have been lately. But if you present yourself the same way you have to me, determined to do anything for peace, they will follow you. I hope." I accepted his reasoning gratefully. Even when agitated, Ray had always been a clear thinker. My flight might be the greatest danger toward your plan, Ray continued. Many of them would rather go against your orders than allow a cobra near their truly Thea. I am trusting you to keep them in line. Ray sighed. You know your mother is not going to agree with you. My mother is not Tuolithea anymore. My voice was solid, and for that I was grateful. He nodded. She has moved into one of the suites on the 4th floor of the keep, and the Tuolithea's apartments has been prepared for you. The royal flight is going to be hard-pressed to defend both you and her from Zane if I also need to assign a guard to protect Zane from them. Zane can stay in one of the side rooms in the Tuolithea's suite, I suggested, having thought this out earlier. Seeing the arrangements for me at the Serpent Palace had made me pause to consider what might be done at the Hawk's Keep. There is only one staircase from or to the 7th floor, so it will be easy for your flight to keep track of Zane's movements and make sure anyone likely to attempt assassination is kept away. Ray nodded thoughtfully. Unfortunately, that puts you in the quick danger if Zane causes trouble or if anyone tries to harm him. If he wanted to kill me, he would have done it, I answered peevishly, my patience wearing thin. There are half a dozen rooms in the Tuolithea's apartments, and to get from any of them to my room, someone grounded would need to pass through the central hallway. The keep was designed so one man in that hall can guard the entire floor. Grudgingly, Ray agreed. There are 4 of my guard in the surrounding woods, he explained. They can serve as an escort for Zane so our soldiers don't kill him on sight. Ray glanced at the doorway. I'll need to send Erica ahead. She's a good fighter, but she's one of the ones I don't trust to keep her knife sheathed if she has a chance to put it in a cobra's back. I'll speak to her once I get to the keep and make sure she won't get too hasty. The rest... He trailed off. You know this entire idea sickens me. He said the words coolly, but the emotion in his eyes was anything but. I know. If this is your decision, I know you'll do it no matter what I say, he sighed. If I fight you on it, it will only endanger you more. I'm helping with this madness for that reason alone, so in the future you'll trust me enough to let me know what you're doing. When I nodded, he admitted frankly, I would like to put a knife in him myself, and if he makes the slightest threatening move anywhere in your direction, I will. With your permission or without Danica. See to it that your... Alistair knows that. Ray paused, then added more softly, Be careful, Danica. Again I nodded, throat closed against any response I could make to this rare display of emotion. We should get Zane now, I said instead. The words were harsh but necessary. Ray looked like he was on the verge of carrying me out of the Serpent Palace without care of propriety or promises of peace. He let out a slow breath, and then we went to get Zane. Ray sent 2 of his flight, Erica and Carl, to accompany me from the Serpent Palace on wing. Adelina and Elib had only deferred to Ray's statement that he could not allow 2 of the palace guard into the Hawk's Keep because Zane had forced them to. We could probably conceal Zane, but sneaking anyone else inside was asking for trouble, and if the palace guard were noticed before the ceremony, it would cause a panic. They would travel on horseback with Zane, Ray, and 2 others in the royal flight until reaching the base of the keep. It was afternoon by the time I returned home. A party traveling on the ground would not traverse the distance as quickly, and I did not expect Ray and Zane to appear until that evening at least. But as day fell to night, I could not help worrying. I did believe that the Serpent were sincere, but believing them and trusting them were entirely different matters. If a scuffle ensued between Ray's people and Zane's, I did not know who would win. Feeling vaguely ill with nerves, I sank into my bed after dinner. It was too late to back out of this, but I could not yet force my mind to accept the arrangement I had agreed to and all it entailed. I was startled from my reverie by a knock on the door to my room. Yes? Ray opened the door, his long hair wind-blown and cheeks flushed. Everyone arrived safely. One of the maids is preparing a room for Zane in the northern set, he informed me. Your mother has been staying in her own room, so we haven't had any trouble keeping Zane out of her sight. He stepped inside and closed the door behind him. Danica, you're pale as a dove. I put my hand to my cheek and felt the chill of my skin. I'm frightened. Ray caught my hand and raised it to his lips. I will keep you safe. The words were a promise, even if it means defending Zane Cobriana from my own people, so you can end this war as your ancestors should have. I will protect you. He sighed. Do you believe me? I believe you, I answered. I knew my smile was tired. Good night, Danica. Good night, I bid him softly. He left, though I knew he would not be going far. He would not leave anyone else to guard the doorway with a cobra so near. I slept well. I'm glad you liked my video, Sandy. I'm glad. Chapter 13. Anxiety woke me early the next morning. I bathed and dressed quickly before meeting up with Zane in the hall outside of my room. Andreas was exchanging a few last words with Zane, detailing the scripted ceremony associated with the naming of an Alistair, which Zane appeared fairly amused to hear about. Tell me, do the 3-year-olds usually honor these vows? Zane asked glibly. Ray kept his control, but the tone of his voice when he responded was sharp enough to tell me that the comment was not the first one Zane had made. Yes, the decision is usually made when an Alistair is that young, but he doesn't take the vows until he is ready. Hopefully you're old enough that they're clear to you, he added between clenched teeth. If they aren't, I'm sure... Good morning, Andreas, I said loudly, drawing both men's attention to me before someone was hit. Good morning, Zane. If the two men ever did come to blows, the fight would be serious. Deadly so, and I doubted they would both walk away alive. I glanced toward the 2 guards who stood in the hall with us and added quietly, Erica, Carl, stand down. Both radiated tension. Erica especially trailed Zane with her eyes as if taking a sight for a notched arrow. Carl flashed what looked like a forced smile. Relax, Erica. We can always say, just kidding, and run for our lives. One of the lightest of tone among the royal flight, Carl had apparently been assigned to this job today to keep my mood from bleakness. His humor and voice almost served to disguise how raptly his attention covered the area, and particularly the cobra. Erica did not appreciate the humor. No disrespect, milady, she said to me with harsh formality, but I will relax only when I am shown proof that he, she nodded in Zane's direction, is harmless. I glanced at Ray, silently questioning his decision. I trusted their loyalty to me, but worried that they might not go out of their way to protect Zane if someone meant him harm. In fact, both struck me as a little overzealous. He answered the unspoken question. I trust these 2 to be loyal to you without fault, and they've sworn not to harm him. When there are others of our kind around who might be a threat to your Alistair, I will assign other guards. When you are alone with the serpent, I won't put someone in the way that might hesitate to fight him. Erica and Carl both looked flattered by their commander's recommendation and unflustered by the implication that they were less than fond of Zane. Since Ray himself had for a moment sounded regretful that he couldn't let them kill their charge, I found it difficult to fault them. Instead, I looked at Zane, who offered a brave smile and a shrug. The serpent was certainly making an attempt to look harmless. He had abandoned his normal black attire in favor of calfskin pants so light they were nearly golden, and a loose shirt several shades darker. The brown tones made his garnet eyes appear less red, and his fair skin warmer. However, clothing could not completely disguise the smooth tension of his movements, so subtly different than any avian, or completely dim the fire in his gaze. I was dreading introducing him to my people. Milady, it is time. Eleanor was slightly breathless as she darted into the room, her cheeks flushed with excitement. Zane offered his arm, at the same time delivering to me a sardonic smile. This is going to be interesting. There was some carefully controlled surprise among my people when I first descended the stairs with Zane instead of Ray, but no instant fury. It occurred to me that most of these people had never seen Zane before, and unless they caught sight of the signet ring he was wearing or met his Cobriana eyes, something he had assured me he could avoid, they were unlikely to recognize him. But as I crossed the room to the slight stage in the back of the court, I could see the ripple of unease in those nearby. Instincts. Even a sleeping dormouse wakes up and knows when the cat is nearby. So it was among the court. Zane, for all his attempts to appear harmless, would never pass for avian. They looked at Ray, and at me, and at the other members of the royal flight who were standing nearby, but since my guards and I were not visibly upset, they assumed their own discomfort was imagined. Only the sight of the blood rushing from my mother's face as she fainted set my heart racing. Gerard caught her, looking a little surprised and unsure of what to do with his charge. Luckily, she had been standing at the far back of the room, and only those nearest to her had noticed. I would deal with her later. Now it was time to step onto the platform. "Tuuli Thea, Danica Charday," Ray greeted me. "You have chosen this man as your Alastair, as your protector, of your own free will and without coercion." "I have." My voice did not tremble. Ray turned to Zane. "Are you willing to swear upon your own spirit and the sky above that you will protect Danica Charday from all harm?" "Upon my own spirit, I will so swear." "And do you swear you will never raise voice or hand against her?" Ray spoke the words calmly, but the expression in his eyes as he met Zane's gaze fearlessly was anything but calm. Zane hesitated a fraction of a second. Whether surprised by Ray's bold action or debating whether he was willing to so swear, I did not care to know. Never would I willingly harm the woman I love. Ray caught the wording, and for a moment I saw his jaw clench against the desire to argue. He knew as well as I that Zane had made no claims of love toward me, and that his promise not to harm the woman he loved did not protect me. Ray's gaze flickered to me, beseeching, and I gave him a nod to continue. I understood Zane's hesitation, despite how unnerving it was. If it came down to a choice of him or me, he would defend himself and his people. He could not swear never to harm me without knowing whether peace between our two peoples would work. "Danica Charday is Tuuli Thea, and so when you swear to her, you swear to all her people," Ray continued, his voice sounding strained. "Will you protect the Tuuli Thea's people as you would your own family, and risk all that is necessary to defend them?" "I swear upon the tears of the goddess Anmirak that I will do everything within my power to stop the bloodshed among the Tuuli Thea's people." In those words I heard sincerity at least. At last, though I did not know the name of the goddess to whom Zane had made the vow, I knew from his tone that he was honest in his words. There were scholars better educated than I among the court, and as I heard their frantic whispers, I knew that some had understood the reference. I also saw with dread that my mother was stirring. As Ray continued, I watched her set her feet on the ground, her reserve shattered, and her face holding abject horror. "Danica Charday, Tuuli Thea, you have chosen this man as your Alastair," Ray continued formally, his voice rising slightly above the noise in the crowd. "Zane Cobriana, you have sworn to defend Danica Charday, your Tuuli Thea. Upon the words you have spoken, you are bound for life." Those words, "for life," had a fateful ring. A hush descended over the avian court, and in those moments, as I waited for a reaction, I met my mother's gaze. She looked at me with sadness and anger and shook her head. Then she began to walk out of the back of the room. Gerard tried to stop her, and I saw her spine go rigid. "The Tuuli Thea has made her choice. My words are meaningless here," she said loudly without turning. I nodded to the guard, and he hurried after the Tuuli Thea he had first served as she left. Her rejection cut, but I had expected it. With a deep breath to loosen the knot in my throat, I stepped forward. The court quieted, awaiting my words, stunned by what they could not believe. I stated simply, "Yes, it is true. This is Zane Cobriana you see before you." I had to raise my voice slightly over the protests as I continued. "Yes, it is Zane Cobriana who has just sworn to defend your Tuuli Thea. And you." That quieted them slightly, and I took advantage of the silence. When the Serpent first spoke to me of peace, I was doubtful. But I am your queen, and as such I am willing to do what I must to protect you, my people. That means ending this war any way I can. I stood at attention, left hand grasping my right wrist behind my back, the pose of a soldier, which I had picked up from Ray and Vasily when I had been a girl. I knew everyone who had ever fought in our armies or lost someone from our armies would recognize the posture. "You know me," I implored them. "You know that I do not avoid going out to the field and caring for the wounded. You know that I do not flinch from the bodies that must be brought home. I do not intend to be a queen who ignores the suffering of her people. I have held your own children's hands and talked to them as they died, so they would not be alone, and I am tired of it." I took Zane's hand, grasping it on the stage in the avian court, in front of so many avian ladies and gentlemen who were shocked by even that small contact. I feared this man, as you do. I hated him, as you do. But when our soldiers cut down his brother in the field, I was the one left to sit by that boy's side as he died. And he was no different than my brother who had died the same day, or the Alastair and family I lost when I was a child. Then Zane came to me, asking for peace, and I had to listen. I took a breath, trying to calm myself. I had not meant to get so carried away, but now the court was watching me in amazement. Perhaps that was a good thing. Zane has sworn to defend my people, and as Naga of the Serpent, I am equally sworn to defend his. There was some more protest at this last statement, and I waited for it to die down before I said softly, "We have all lost loved ones, and if I need to go onto the field and disarm every frightened soldier by hand, alone in the night, I will do it. As of this moment, I declare this war is over. Any injury done to the Serpent will be looked upon as injury to my people and to your people." The court did not know how to react. They had been raised avian and were not taught to loudly express outrage or fear. However, under the circumstances, polite caution and distaste could not cover what they wanted to say. Finally, one soft voice pervaded the area. "Milady, how can we be sure of their intentions?" The crowd parted so the woman who was speaking could approach me. "Of course, I have faith in you and your judgment, but might the Serpent even now be planning to attack as soon as you recall our soldiers?" I had a similar thought when Irene Cobriana first came to the keep to ask for a meeting in Mistari land, I admitted. The royal flight and my own family both cautioned me against trusting the Serpent, and I was spirited back to the keep. But Zane was not that easily dismissed, I recalled. And when he showed up in my suite a few weeks later, unbeknownst to my guards, my mother, and everyone else in the keep, it was hard to believe that he intended me harm. Ray was visibly perturbed by these words, but he said nothing as I continued to speak. Had the Serpent wanted to injure me, there would have been opportunity, here in the keep and at the Serpent Palace on the 2 occasions that I have visited there. Yet I stand before you unscratched. I spoke softly, but I knew my voice would carry in the near silence of the court. I ask for trust. I ask that I might never again hold another dying soldier, avian or Serpent, in my arms. I ask for trust. I ask that you put away your weapons so we can mourn the dead properly and then move on. I ask for trust. I ask that your children can learn of peace instead of war. I ask for trust. It is a lot, I know. It isn't easy to give, but it is all I ask. Chapter 14. Escorted by Andreas and Karl, Zane and I withdrew, leaving the court alone to make their decisions. I heard several voices raised, among them Eleanor, loudly declaring their support before anyone else could speak. After Zane and I had settled onto the balcony that marked the highest point in the keep, I asked, "Who is Anna Mirak?" 2 of the royal flight were waiting discreetly on the stairs down to the main apartment. Ray had reluctantly gone to bed after what must have been more than a full night and day awake. Zane's gaze was distracted as he looked out over the surrounding forest and distant mountains, and doubtless wondered how the argument back in the court was going. If it went badly, there were 7 floors between him and safety. Anna Mirak, I repeated, trying to keep either of us from mulling over what was happening. You swore to her during the ceremony when Ray asked whether you would defend my people as your own. When Egypt was young, and the first pyramids were being built with the sweat and blood of slavery, Zane recited, not turning his gaze from the view, there was a sect of 13 men and women, the high priestess of whom was a woman called Maeve. They worshipped a goddess named Anamirak, who ruled over life, light, love, beauty, and above all, free will. Zane sighed. As the myth goes, a creature by the name of Leben appeared to Maeve and instructed her to stop her worship of Anamirak and turn it onto him. He was powerful, but not a god, and Maeve knew it. She seduced him, and in an attempt to gain her favor, he gave to her ageless beauty and the second form of an elegant viper with ivory scales. She demanded that he do the same for all her people, including a woman named Keisha. To Keisha, Leben gave the form of a king cobra, and from her son, or so the story goes, the Cobriana line is descended. Do you believe it? I asked, rather entranced by the tale. I believe this. Zane held up a hand, and I could not help but stepping back as the ink-dark snakeskin rippled into appearance over his bare skin, only to subside again as if it had never existed. And I believe this. I had been watching him so intently that I had no chance to avert my gaze as he lifted Garnet Cobra's eyes, halting the air in my lungs. I have seen the serpents dance, and if it isn't magic, I can find no better word. He looked away, returning those frightening jeweled eyes to the landscape as he leaned against the balcony railing. My breath let out in a rush. What about you, Danica? He asked. What do you believe in? The story behind my kind was equally magical, but it had always been told to me just as that. A story, and nothing more. Now I moved beside Zane, and I looked out at the land that held his attention. I believe in the air beneath my wings when I soar. Is this what the world looks like when you are flying? I tried to see the land below as would someone who had not seen it from this height every day. The sky was just beginning to color with the pink and violet streaks of twilight, and long shadows streaked the ground. It's not as clear as this, I responded, trying to recall what the ground did look like to a hawk in flight. When you fly, the air is mostly what you are aware of. How it moves, how you move in it. The ground isn't important unless you're diving, landing, or falling. Falling? I had been hit once by a serpient arrow, clipped in the wing while I was flying from a battle. Falling, unable to steady myself for several seconds, I had only escaped the deadly impact with the ground because one of Ray's soldiers had caught me. It was not a moment I wanted to dwell on, or repeat. It happens, sometimes, was all I told Zane. Milady? The voice came from a very hesitant young sparrow, whose gaze flickered to and from Zane with bright fear. When you have a moment, your mother would like to speak to you and your Alistair. She hesitated, as if my mother had used different words to describe Zane. She is welcome to come speak to me at any time, I responded, both relieved that my mother was unlocking herself from her room and dreading the confrontation to come. Kindly invite her to join us here. The sparrow bobbed a clumsy curtsy and disappeared quickly. I think she's afraid of me, Zane observed, a dark humor showing through in his tone. He leaned back against the railing, crossing his arms, then pausing. Like a cobra, coiled and waiting, a deep stillness seeping into him as he prepared to face my mother. I wondered if he even realized how dangerous he appeared in that moment. My kind lets off subtle signs of life, even when we're not moving. The heat of our bodies and the quick pace of our heartbeat. When Zane stood still, even his breathing slowed, as if he might simply dissolve into the night. The only sign of life in him was the flash of light off his iridescent gemstone eyes. Please don't hide. I wondered if, when I looked at him now, I saw and felt what he did when I pulled on my mask of avian reserve. If it was true, I could see how the myths had begun, saying we had no souls. The time had passed for me to respond to Zane's forcedly light remark, and now an awkward silence stretched between us, both of us hidden behind our own shields, and both unnerved by them. I think she's not the only one, he added under his breath as my mother ascended the stairway. Danica Charday, you are truly Thea now, and I have no power to override your decisions. Nicola's voice was forced, as if she had rehearsed this speech many times before coming to me. But I will not support your agreeing to this sickening arrangement. I'm sorry to hear that. I truly was. My mother's approval was something I had always strived for, and the lack of it now left me groundless. But my people must come even before you, Mother, as your people should come before your daughter. Child, I would not protest so if I thought this would work, my mother argued. I understand the sacrifices a queen must make for her people, but those sacrifices must be for a reason, and this is a reasonless act. Our two kinds are not meant to live together, Danica, she said softly. From the very first, we have been enemies, and so it will be until either they are destroyed or we are. You're absolutely correct. I jumped at Zane's voice, and my gaze shifted to him. Snakes and birds are not creatures intended to live together. As I recall, hawks will snatch young cobras from the nest and eat them. But surely you are forgetting something rather important, milady Nicola. He paused there and waited as if for an answer. My mother did not reply, and finally Zane just sighed. The first of my kind was a human woman. Surely your kind comes from like roots. We have human minds and human bodies. If we can speak as humans do and love as humans do, then what makes us so different? Zane's words were simple, but the anger and hope behind them were anything but. Serpents and birds are not meant to live together, he asserted again, but I personally like to believe that we are more than our animal counterparts. Your people, my mother spat in a rare show of fury, murdered my parents, my sisters, my husband, my son, and my daughter, and your people, Zane replied with equal vehemence, have taken from me a father, 2 uncles, 3 brothers, a sister, and a niece who had not even drawn her first breath. What possible harm had that infant done to you? He turned away as if he did not trust himself to face her, and he paced to the railing. Milady Nicola, he said tightly, I don't want to fight with you. I fear I lose my temper too easily for your world standards. What I am trying to say is that I am willing to forgive history and try to act as the human blood in me implores. Your temper is renowned, my mother responded, her voice once again under control and acid in its detachment. Your kind has never been famous for holding it in cheek or holding in check its tongue or its hands, and I wouldn't expect its king to do any better. Zane drew a breath as if to speak, but my mother continued, With that in mind, surely you can understand my reluctance to trust you with my daughter. I have given my word I will not harm her, Zane interjected, but my mother simply shook her head. And when that Cobriana temper breaks loose, what then? She argued, for all intents and purposes ignoring my presence. Violence is common among the Serpent Court, or so I hear, and accepted to a much greater degree than it is in the keep. I don't expect Danica has had much experience with being struck, and I don't wish her to gather such familiarity. Nicola, allow me to finish this. To my shock, my mother met Zane's eyes with her own fiery golden gaze, and Zane was the one who looked away. If I am to have no say in this decision, I would at least speak my mind to you. Continue. The word was tense, and Zane pointedly avoided looking at me as he said it. My mother stepped closer. If you ever put a hand on my daughter, I assure you, fair Nicola, I have no intent to bruise such soft skin as Danica's. With that point overemphasized, is there anything else you would like to accuse me of? She is not one of the casual women of your court, Zane, my mother argued next. Quite obviously, came Zane's silken reply. Your word that you will never force her to your bed. The order came difficultly to my mother's lips, and Zane recoiled in response, his eyes narrowing in fury. Would my word mean anything to you, Nicola? The word of a cobra for your daughter's virtue? My mother hesitated, her lips parting as if she would speak, and then sealing closed again without a sound passing them. Her gaze was hard, clearly speaking the answer. No, his word would mean nothing to her. Leave now, Nicola Chardet. Zane's voice was cold as ice. Zane whirled to face me, turning from my mother's protest. Danica, get her out of here before I hurt her. I stumbled back, but did not stop to question him. I caught my mother's arm, imploring her. Mother, please return to your room now. Danica, she broke off, and with one more fleeting look at Zane, she nodded. We walked in silence until we reached the doorway to her room, the place where my sister had once slept, long ago when I had been a child. I know you will go through with this, my mother said flatly, her voice soft and sad. Even Karashan admits that you are too brave for any of us to change your mind, Danica. But please don't let that courage make you careless. Keep a guard within shouting range, and never let the door lock when the two of you are alone. Sleep with a knife under your pillow if you must, but be careful, because he will hurt you if you do not protect yourself. She sighed, her voice a whisper as she added, History repeats itself too easily. I thought of the knife in the back that had ended Alice Dare's life and nodded. The events of both this evening and the past forced me to respect my mother's words. I returned to my balcony to find Zane gone. The guards informed me that he had retreated to his room and asked not to be disturbed until next dawn by anyone but me. All right. That will bring us to a close for this evening's read. Thank you guys for hanging with me and hopefully enjoying this evening's read. I know I was stumbling around with my words a little bit. I think my eyeballs are still a little tired from my nap, but yeah. So we're almost done. We've probably got another 2 readings left, I would say. And so we're just going to, once this book is concluded, we're just going to keep on with the series. But until then, I hope you guys continue enjoying what we're doing, hoping that you guys are liking this book so far. I will see you guys next Monday, same time, same place, 8 to 9 o'clock. Have a fantastic week and a great weekend, because Labor Day weekend is upon us. So, hope you guys stay safe and have fun, and I will see you all on Monday. Bye.